The history of heavy.
Welcome to episode 33 of the History of Heavy podcast. This is a show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. Tonight, I am your host, Dave Lieberman in San Francisco, and across the screen there is my co-host, Michael Huntsman. How you doing tonight, Mike?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. I love you being in the driver's seat, so this will be a fun episode.
I love the role reversal cadence we've got here. When I recommend a song, I magically become the host, and it's a lot of fun. So tonight, I have brought to you a selection from Madame Janis Joplin. This is from the 1971 album Pearl, and it is called Move Over. And I added this almost against your will, but you were kind enough to be a sport and go with it. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion tonight about that. But before we get into that, we need a little bit of cultural context. We have closed out 1970 and we're opening a new chapter in the 70s. Michael, tell us about 1971.
I will do that. Before I do that, one comment and one question. The comment is, this is our podcast. So as much of a control freak as I like to be about these things, all options, all songs, all artists are on the table. You just say when and I will be there. The question related to artists is this, Dave. Are you a little sad that we're not talking about Black Sabbath tonight?
I'm sure we're going to find a way.
I'm sure we will find a way. But okay, let me tee up 1971. After 8 episodes dedicated to the year 1970, that included 6 songs and 2 Black Sabbath albums, we are finally flipping the calendar to 1971. We will be talking about 6 songs also in this year, starting with tonight. And of course, the third Black Sabbath album, which was also released in 1971 when we get through all of those songs. But I'm going to kick off 1971 by just covering the first 3 months and kind of look across world events, pop culture, and then assorted ephemera. So, you know, there's some significant stuff that happened in the world in 1971, but I didn't want to get too far afield. So here are the kind of interesting tidbits that I chose to pull out. Starting on January 12th, when CBS debuts its new sitcom All in the Family, starring Carol O'Connor as Archie Bunker. That show would go on to become a staple of 70s TV, running across 9 seasons.
Wow.
In Los Angeles, on January 25th, the 3 female members of the Manson family, those being Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, are all found guilty of the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders. On January 31st, Apollo 14 lifts off and becomes the 3rd successful lunar landing mission. It's becoming so rote at this point that we barely need to talk about it. On February 4th, 1971, the NASDAQ stock exchange is founded in New York City.
Wow.
Then 2 days later, on February 6th, an earthquake shakes the Italian province of Viterbo, killing 24 people. And then 3 days later, on February 9th, the Silmar earthquake hits Los Angeles and kills 64 people, injuring another 2,000. Also on February 9th, a little happier news, Satchel Paige becomes the first Negro League player to be voted into baseball's Hall of Fame. But then back to sad news. On February 13th in South Vietnam, American-backed troops invade Laos as the Vietnam War sadly continues. February 15th becomes Decimal Day as both the UK and Ireland switch to decimal currency,
I see
which
your
just
point.
good one. That just seemed to always be the way. It's weird that only happened in 1971, but that is when it happened. Then on February 28th, the Great Evil Knievel sets the world record by jumping 19 cars on his motorcycle in Ontario, California. Why? I have no idea, but I absolutely loved him when I was 4 years old in 1971.
It was a
In
thing.
March of 71, the fight of the century takes place at Madison Square Garden, where Joe Frazier defeats Muhammad Ali. George Lucas releases his first feature film, THX 1138. I'm stumbling over all of my words. And also in March of 71, Starbucks is founded in the state of Washington. Key musical events in March include Led Zeppelin's first ever performance of Stairway to Heaven, which happens to be in Belfast. And then on March 5th, that was on March 5th, apologies. Then on March 12th and 13th, the Allman Brothers Band play their legendary concert at the Fillmore East. Important albums related to the history of heavy that were released in the first 3 months of 1971 include Janis Joplin's Pearl, which we are talking about tonight, Uriah Heep's second album, Salisbury, ZZ Top's appropriately titled ZZ Top's first album, Cactus's One Way or Another, the debut album by Crazy Horse, Alice Coltrane's fourth album, which we will be talking about in a few weeks, Alice Cooper's Love It to Death, the debut LP from Black Oak, Arkansas, and for those krautrock fans, the mighty Omondul 2 released their fourth album. And that is January, February, and March of 1971.
Dang. Q1 is on fire already. I love the context because we don't think about things like Decimal Day being a marker of change as
Right.
late as 1971. It feels like we had math for longer, and now we have decimal points in 1971,
I wasn't counting shit in 1971, so not sure.
right?
You weren't
Very
even
good.
born yet.
No, no, I still had a couple years. I was in the cosmic dust. I was just chilling.
You were?
I was like
Planet
a Pink
Caravan.
Floyd song. Yeah. Planet Caravan, indeed. Um, Wonderful. Well, that's going to be a great context for today's song, which is, as we mentioned, off of the Pearl album from 1971. The song is called Move Over. This song is, I wanted to include this song for a couple of reasons. Number one, I felt like having a Janis Joplin in our conversation was important for a couple of reasons. I, and full confession, I don't typically go to Janis Joplin for much. I've always known about her; she's always been in the background, but uh, I didn't have a huge connection. But we can save some of that for our chat. I did want to give a little background on her because I feel like the background informs her delivery, and that's what gets her on the list. Janis Joplin was a very troubled woman, turns out. Born in Port Arthur, Texas, January 19th, 1943. She's one of the most iconic and successful rock performers of her era, noted for her powerful mezzo-soprano vocals and her electric stage presence. In 1967, Joplin rose to prominence following an appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival, where she was the lead singer of the then little-known San Francisco psychedelic rock band Big Brother and the Holding Company. After releasing 2 albums with the band, she left Big Brother to continue as a solo artist with her own backing groups, first the Cosmic Blues Band, and then Full Tilt Boogie Band. She performed famously at the 1969 Woodstock Festival. Joplin died of a heroin overdose in 1970 at the age of 27 after releasing 3 albums, 2 with the Holding Company and 1 solo. A second solo album, Pearl, tonight's choice is from Pearl, was released in January 1971, 3 months after her death. It reached #1 on the Billboard 200. She was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, and Rolling Stone ranked Joplin number 28 on its 2008 list of 200 greatest singers of all time, dropping to number 78 in the 2023 list. As of 2013, she remains one of the top selling vocalists in the United States, with Recording Industry Association of America certifications of 18.5 million albums sold. So that's a little bit of background. But as far as Joplin goes, really, when she was a teenager, she befriended a group of outcasts, one of whom had albums from blues artists like Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and Leadbelly, which Joplin later credited with influencing her decision to become a singer. She also stated that she was ostracized and bullied in high school. As a teen, she became overweight and suffered from acne, leaving her with deep scars that required dermabrasion. In 1962, though, she starts recording her own work. She leaves Texas in 1963 for San Francisco, gets busted for shoplifting in SF, and during the 2 years that followed, her drug use increased and she acquired a reputation as a bit of a speed freak and an occasional heroin user. She also used other psychoactive drugs and was a heavy drinker throughout her career, her favorite alcoholic beverage being Southern Comfort. Yuck. In May 1965, Joplin's friends in San Francisco persuaded her to return to Port Arthur, noticing the detrimental effects on her from regularly injecting methamphetamine. She changed her lifestyle, avoided drugs and alcohol, adopted a new beehive hairdo, and enrolled as an anthropology major at Lamar University in nearby Beaumont, Texas. She becomes engaged in the fall of 1965 to a man living in New York, where he worked with IBM computers, but shortly after, the fiance ended the engagement. She does engage in therapy and continues her kind of lifestyle improvements. But then in 1966, her bluesy vocal style attracts the attention of the San Francisco blues-based rock band, Big Brother and the Holding Company, where she moved to join them. Joplin performed at Woodstock starting at approximately 2 a.m. on Sunday, August 17th, 1969. Joplin had, excuse me, Joplin had informed her band that they would be performing at the concert as if it were just another gig. She was flown in by helicopter with the pregnant Joan Baez and Joan Baez's mother. I just thought that was funny. But she was unhappy with her performance, and the singing was not included by her own insistence in the 1970 documentary film or the soundtrack about Woodstock. Um, so in February 1970, she traveled to Brazil, where she again stopped her drug and alcohol use. But when she returned to the US, she began using again. And on Sunday evening, October 4th, 1970, Joplin was found dead on the floor of her room at the Landmark Motor Hotel. Alcohol was present in the room, and newspapers reported that no other drugs or paraphernalia were present. But according to a 1983 book, evidence of narcotics was removed from the scene by a friend of Joplin's and later put back after the person realized that an autopsy was going to reveal narcotics anyway. And that's exactly what happened. She was determined, the autopsy determined the cause of death to be heroin overdose compounded by alcohol. So her death in October of 1970 at age 27 stunned her fans and shocked the music world, especially when coupled with the deaths of canned heat singer Alan Wilson a month earlier and rock icon Jimi Hendrix 16 days earlier, both aged 27. All three musicians performed at the two biggest rock festivals of the 1960s, Monterey Pop Festival and Woodstock. And this is the beginning of the 27 Club. So, Mike, we are at the end of a very short, tragic life that burned hot and fast. And I think that that adds a level of anguish and dread in her vocal presence. Her style is so compatible with the blues that she really is known for because you feel her pain, and it's the pain of authenticity. That's real. She really
Well
knows
said.
despair. So that's why I wanted her to be on this in this compilation, or excuse me, in this conversation. And I picked this song because it was a little bit different, little less, maybe more of a deep cut, a little less well known than some of her other obvious ones. However, I think it really nails the darkness, the despair, the anguish, and uh, and it's heavy as fuck.
Yeah. I'm really glad you picked it. Janis Joplin would have absolutely never occurred to me for any conversation related to heavy. But not only is everything you described about her life and, or frankly, just her singing voice exactly, absolutely heavy, but this song is absolutely heavy. So I'm glad we are talking about it. Also notable that Janis is now only the third woman that has been involved in any song we've talked about through 33 episodes. Mo Tucker, the drummer of the Velvet Underground, is a woman, and the lead singer of the late 60s kind of occult rock band Coven is a woman. But other than that, that's it. Now we get to Janis Joplin. We'll talk about Alice Coltrane in a few weeks, but women have been sorely unrepresented in our conversation, and partially or largely because they weren't involved in quote unquote heavy music, um, really up until now, and now we'll see some more of them. So I'm glad we're giving Janis her fair due. My relationship with her is kind of non-existent. I grew up as mentioned, right as she was peaking and then dying. And I've talked about my older sisters on the show a lot, and I inherited a lot of my young musical taste from them. And the women that they exposed me to that I fell in love with were Joni Mitchell and Linda Ronstadt and Fleetwood Mac and Carole King. But
Okay.
they weren't big Janis fans. So Janis was not part of my musical upbringing. Obviously, I'd heard her music, and I mean, you just described some of the accolades. I mean, she was unmistakable on FM radio, and she was massively popular, but never, her music just absolutely never did it for me. I've talked about before that I'm not necessarily a big blues guy. Her music is very bluesy. And we've talked about how our perception of an artist and how specifically we perceive the audience of that artist will significantly impact the way we feel about them. You talk about the Rolling Stones quite regularly, and how it's not so much their music you don't like, it's their kind of persona, and
It's
what
something.
it's
Yeah.
something. And for me, having start beginning my very young childhood years in the 70s, the sort of hippie aesthetic was never anything that I connected with. There was a kid across the street that was my sister's, so maybe 10 years older than me or whatever, named Kevin. And the three things I remember about Kevin is he played frisbee all the time, he never wore a shirt, and he never wore shoes. And he was a hippie, and his feet were always so disgusting that though Kevin's feet sort of were the totem for everything that I negatively thought about hippiedom and the Haight Ashbury and this kind of blues and everything that I see Janis Joplin represented. And I do think it needs to be said that, and I'll just say, I don't like Janis's music. I wonder if I would have felt differently about Janis Joplin's music if she was a traditionally beautiful woman. Listening to her music now, I like her music way more than I like Linda Ronstadt's music. Linda Ronstadt was a beautiful woman. Stevie Nicks was a beautiful woman. So yeah, I think I kind of unfairly subconsciously think of her music in a particular way because of the way the image she projects and what she physically looked like, which is fucked up. But I think that's real. So setting that aside, um, again, I like this music way better than I have ever liked it in my life. So I'm really glad you picked this song. And this song is indeed heavy. And as I mentioned when we were talking about Sabbath last week, that for all the reasons you mentioned, I think it's important to include this style of heavy in the
Hmm.
conversation, that it's not just down tuned, doomy guitars.
Right.
It's also this manic energy and shrieking vocals and just pure intensity that is coming from emotion and not from storytelling or sonics
Sure.
necessarily, which I think this song is really cool for those reasons.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you had that reaction. Um, I similarly don't have much of a relationship with Janis Joplin. What I've heard, I've liked, but I've never dug deeper. And it's always kind of pleasant and familiar when I hear it, so I won't turn it away, but I forget to seek it out. It's not so much that I don't like it as much as I just forget about it. And that's a little bit sad because for this episode, listening to Move Over, also for context, listening to some of the other bigger hits and stuff I had already had familiar with, but listening to it anew and kind of studying it, man, it's good. It's good stuff. And so there's a lot of music in the world, and sometimes this happens. I remember seeing people with their punk rocker jackets and having all these buttons and logos and everything. Like, well, I listen to them and that, but I couldn't keep up.
Sure.
I didn't have the kind of money it took to go to the record store and just discover bands. I wasn't able to go out to shows. I couldn't find the shows. That these were bands that broke up in the 80s. So there's a lot of bands that I know of and don't know their music, and I feel like Janis Joplin is halfway in that camp. I didn't listen to her for the wrong reasons, and they were all circumstantial. So coming to this song and listening to this song, I really liked it, and I find that it's so heavy in its presentation, her vocal timbre, just that raspy uh range. She has a bit of range,
Yeah.
but and the power, right? She's got a lot of power. And I was trying to think of vocalists that are sort of adjacent. I was having a really hard time, but like Brian Johnson came to mind. Because he has that kind of a raspy, woody quality to his voice, but also a lot of power. I was struggling to find other parallels, and that's one of the things I really appreciated about her is that her vocal style is very, very unique.
Yeah. Yeah, she's the one that immediately comes to mind for me is Joe Cocker. She's like
There you go.
she's the female Joe Cocker.
Mm,
You know what really struck me as it relates to heavy in this song and the energy that Janis brings to it is, when you look at the songs we've talked about so far, all of the ones that are upbeat, the Deep Purples and the Uriah Heeps and even Loose by the Stooges, certainly Kick Out the Jams, all of those songs that are propulsive but still heavy are angry. They are coming from this angry sensibility. We've talked about plenty of stuff that has more of like a psychedelic moody heaviness, like the Beatles, "She's So Heavy," and Zeppelin and Beefheart and a number of things. And we've talked about weird and arty heavy, like the Velvet Underground and again Beefheart. But those things that have a little bit of energy to them. We've talked a lot about how punk isn't necessarily what we think of as heavy. This song And I think her music in general, even when it's upbeat, is not angry. It sounds it's desperate, and
Yeah, it's
it's
anguish.
anguish, yes, but still heavy. You know, it doesn't lose any of the. It's not sad. You know,
No,
it's desperate and
it's
anguished.
desperate. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Which really struck me and kind of spoke to me. Listening to it over these last few weeks, which it never had to me before. And I do have to say, eh, this is by far my favorite Janis Joplin song that I'm aware of, and I think Pearl is the only Janis Joplin record that I've really ever heard, front to back. But this song is legitimately a jam.
Right on.
Yeah.
Right on. I don't know that I have much more to say about it, other than it checked a box for me, and I wanted to bring it to our conversation. And when I first did, you had a reluctance to it, and
Mhm.
so I'm really glad that we're able to bring it in and find a place for it, and mutually agree that there's a place for this
Yeah.
in our spectrum.
When you think about the influence of something like this, or you talked about her voice being pretty unique and it's hard to pinpoint who is a comp for her. Is there any other music kind of in the heavy realm that you think about, or maybe not even heavy necessarily, that you can see connected to Janis Joplin? I mean, obviously the stuff that was happening of the day, but kind of like the inheritors of what Janis did way back when.
I don't see her fingerprints on things the way we do so clearly with other bands. Think looking at you, Black Sabbath. Um, but I feel like she's one of those personas that is personally inspiring to a lot of people who go on to become musicians.
Yeah.
People see her story and draw strength from it and find their own strength to find that inspiring to spark their own fire.
Hmm.
Uh, fire sounds different than Janis Joplin. It looks different than Janis Joplin. I think that I have a hard time finding parallels or lineage. And it's not that it isn't there, it's that I'm not familiar enough with the minutia of music to find it. I'm sure it's there, but I suspect that her influence is broad, but not on a sound print sort of way.
Yeah, so that's interesting you say that, because the one that I came up with, and I have no idea if this person was at all inspired by her, but there are certainly parallels, and that would be Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse is also a member of the 27 Club. She also had sort of that one album that really tipped her over the. I guess Janis didn't really have one album, but I mean, Pearl is the most identifiable record, and Back to Black is kind of the Amy Winehouse record, and the Very Troubled Lives ultimately died of a drug addiction. It seemed like there's a lot kind of there, a lot of pressure on that person to
Sure,
propel to
sure.
success and all of those sorts of things.
And another very distinct voice. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
Amy Winehouse had a style that she was identifying with, but so did Janis Joplin.
Right.
She sounds like a blues singer,
Yeah.
but she does it in the way that is very unique, in a way that's very unique, and in a way that I don't hear echoes of
Yeah.
since.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
The only other thing I would add is, I don't even know who is in the band. I don't know who's playing any of the instruments, but I really like their playing on this song. The thing we always give Sabbath credit for is the groove that people look past, and they're heavy but have this groove. The song has a definitive groove, but is still heavy and has a really great energy to it, above and beyond her voice, which just takes it over the top. But
mhm.
the playing on this song, I really appreciated, and it kind of jumped out at me in a way that none of her music had before I listened to it.
Yeah, I would suggest going back to listening to some of the Big Brother and the Holding Company stuff.
Hmm.
It has a lot of that '60s signature sound, but what that means is what that leads to is a lot of really cool bass pieces, little interludes, grooves, straight up bass lines, but a lot of just bass work in between the lines. It's that very flat, deep, clean bass sound that I love, that Paul McCartney does so well, and that we've talked about in other band
Yeah.
Glass Beams more recently. It's just such clean work, and it's the production of it is way up there, so you can hear it very clearly. It's not distorted, and it balances out the rest of the players so well. I do like in this song how they have the melody parody where the guitar and the bass and the vocals are all doing the same line,
Mhm.
which can be kind of pedestrian if that's what your whole career is rested on, but it works when it's a piece of the song. Everybody's in chorus together, and then it breaks off and they do their things, and then it comes back and it keeps holding the song together.
You could not agree more. It feels like they're in conversation together in a really cool way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, should we do song v song? I like this song. I don't think it's going to get past.
This is as far as I've gone with it.
Yeah, yeah. Like, your current champ is Sir Lord Baltimore's Kingdom Come. I still have the Stooges and Loose. Of course, we didn't include any Sabbath from the album discussions. But yeah, I really enjoyed getting to know this song a little bit and digging deeper into Janis Joplin. And thank you for the nudge, because again, it just would not have occurred to me. And I think that again, this notion of trying to push the boundaries of what you and I consider heavy and why makes it really interesting. And when we talk about things like John Coltrane and the Kingsmen and the MC5 and then Janis Joplin, I think it makes for an interesting tapestry overall. And so I'm glad you brought her up.
Awesome. Who's your
Okay,
champion?
my champion is still the Stooges. It's still Loose.
Yeah, no surprise. I'm staying with royalty. Sir Lord Baltimore has seen me through so far.
Well, next week they're going to have a mighty contender. I talked earlier about Joe Frazier versus Muhammad Ali.
Hmm.
Next week we get into episode 2 of 1971 to talk about the mighty Pink Floyd and the song One of These Days. I debated long and hard about including Pink Floyd in the heavy conversation, and then when I felt like they needed to be included, long and hard about what song. I think you and I even talked about it a little bit. That's where we landed, and I think that'll be another interesting conversation about how does Pink Floyd fit into this whole heavy thing. So that'll be
I'm looking
next week.
forward to it.
I am
Yes,
too.
sir.
I am too. It'll be fun.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for the ride along with my training wheels on here. Always a pleasure being your host. Always a pleasure being your co host. We will be back and do it again next week.
Yes, we will. And all I have to say, Dave, is okay. Thank you. Bye.